The Vikings' battles with the Islamic Empire, you must understand, were not just random raids or opportunistic attacks. They were some of the most audacious military expeditions in medieval history, where Norse warriors from the frozen north clashed with the sophisticated armies of the Islamic world in conflicts that spanned from the sun-baked cities of Spain to the golden domes of Constantinople. These weren't simply cultural encounters. These were explosive collisions between two of medieval Europe's most formidable military powers, conflicts that produced some of the most spectacular victories and devastating defeats in Viking history. When Norse longships appeared off the coasts of Islamic territories, the results were battles so violent, so unexpected, and so consequential that they reshaped the balance of power across the entire Mediterranean world. The most infamous of all Viking Islamic confrontations began in 844, when dozens of Viking longships appeared in the waters off southern Spain, ready to attack one of the most prosperous cities in the Islamic world, Seville. This wasn't just another coastal raid, this was an assault on the heart of the Umayyad Emirate, a military adventure so bold that it stunned both Muslim and Christian chroniclers across Europe. Seville, you see, was not some minor outpost but one of the jewels of Islamic Spain, a center of learning, trade, and military power that controlled the Guadalquivir River and served as a gateway to the interior of al-Andalus. The attack on Seville in 844 was the first confirmed large-scale Viking incursion on the Iberian Peninsula, and it caught the Muslim authorities completely off guard. The Viking fleet that appeared off Seville was massive by medieval standards. Chroniclers describe dozens of longships carrying hundreds of Norse warriors who had sailed from bases in Ireland and Francia specifically to attack Islamic territories. These were not desperate refugees or random pirates. These were experienced Viking raiders who had chosen to test their skills against one of the most powerful Islamic states in Europe. The initial assault on Seville was a masterpiece of Viking tactical surprise. After a brief siege and fierce fighting, the Northmen stormed Seville's city fortifications in early October 844, and within minutes, hundreds of Vikings had rushed into the unfortified city. The speed of the Viking attack left the Muslim defenders no time to organize an effective response. What followed was a week of systematic destruction that demonstrated just how effective Viking raiding tactics could be against Islamic urban centers. Wielding their customary axes and screaming war cries, the Vikings spent days wreaking havoc throughout Seville, looting homes, destroying mosques, and capturing hundreds of Muslim civilians who would be sold as slaves in Viking markets across Europe. But the Muslim response to the Viking occupation of Seville revealed the organizational superiority of Islamic military systems. Abd al-Rahman II, the Umayyad Emir of Cordoba, mobilized his forces with impressive speed and efficiency, assembling an army that included both regular troops and local militias determined to drive out the Norse invaders. The Muslim counterattack, when it came, caught the Vikings in a tactical situation they were not prepared for. Instead of the quick raid and escape that characterized most Viking operations, the Norse found themselves trapped in an urban environment against an enemy that outnumbered them dramatically and fought with the desperation of people defending their homeland. The Battle of Tablata, fought just outside Seville, demonstrated that Viking tactical superiority was not universal. The Muslim cavalry and infantry, fighting in coordinated formations on familiar ground, inflicted heavy casualties on the Viking raiders, killing many of their leaders and forcing the survivors to retreat to their ships under constant harassment. The aftermath of the Seville raid was even more significant than the battle itself. The Umayyad forces pursued the fleeing Vikings down the Guadalquivir River, attacking their ships with fireboats and shore-based catapults in a running battle that lasted for days. Many Viking ships were destroyed, their crews killed or captured, and the survivors who eventually escaped carried tales of Muslim military prowess back to Scandinavia. More importantly, the Muslim response to the Viking raid included the construction of new fortifications and the creation of a permanent naval force designed specifically to counter future Norse attacks. The consequences helped propel the Muslim Emirate into one of the great powers of the Mediterranean region, transforming the Umayyad state into a maritime power capable of projecting force across the western Mediterranean. The Vikings' encounters with the Islamic world were not limited to Spain, however. Some of the most spectacular Viking-Islamic conflicts occurred in the eastern Mediterranean, where the Ruses, Viking descendants who had established kingdoms in what is now Russia, launched massive attacks against the very heart of the Byzantine Empire and its Islamic neighbors. The Siege of Constantinople in 860 represents perhaps the most audacious military expedition ever attempted by Viking forces. In June 860, the Rus launched a surprise attack on Constantinople at a time when the city was left largely undefended, as Byzantine Emperor Michael III was off with his army fighting the Abbasid Caliphate in Asia Minor, while the Byzantine navy was engaged with Arab pirates on the Mediterranean Sea. The scale of this Viking assault was breathtaking. Sources describe a fleet of 200 longships carrying as many as 20,000 Rus warriors who appeared suddenly in the Bosphorus and launched an immediate assault on the suburbs of Constantinople. This was not a raid, but a full-scale invasion designed to capture the greatest city in the Christian world. The psychological impact of 20,000 Vikings appearing outside Constantinople cannot be overstated. The Byzantines were experiencing the same horrors other Vikings were inflicting on the coasts of Germany, England, Ireland, France, Muslim Spain, and Italy. The surprise attack caught the Byzantine defenders off guard, and Vikings surged ashore, pillaging the suburbs and burning monasteries in scenes of destruction that horrified the sophisticated urban population. But the siege also demonstrated the limitations of Viking military techniques when faced with sophisticated fortifications and organized urban defense. Despite their numerical superiority and tactical surprise, the Rus were unable to breach Constantinople's massive walls or overcome the city's defensive systems, which had been designed to withstand sieges by the most powerful armies of the ancient world. The most dramatic moments of the siege occurred when Vikings took 22 servants of the former patriarch Ignatius aboard their ships and hacked them to death with axes, demonstrating the cultural and religious dimensions of Viking-Islamic conflict. This wasn't just military conquest. This was a clash between fundamentally different approaches to war, religion, and civilization. The end of the 860 siege came suddenly and mysteriously, with the Rus withdrawing from Constantinople after just a few days of fighting. Byzantine chroniclers attributed this withdrawal to divine intervention, while more modern historians suggest that news of the emperor's return with his army convinced the Viking commanders that they could not maintain their siege against organized opposition. The Rus returned to attack Constantinople again in 941, this time with an even larger fleet that chroniclers describe as consisting of 1,000 ships. This second assault demonstrated the persistence of Viking ambitions in the eastern Mediterranean and their willingness to risk enormous resources in attempts to capture the greatest prize in the medieval world. The 941 attack was initially more successful than the 860 siege, with Viking forces landing unopposed and spreading across the countryside around Constantinople. But the Byzantine response revealed how much the empire had learned from previous Viking attacks. With the Byzantine army and navy once again gone from the city, a fleet of 1,000 ships descended upon Constantinople, only to be defeated by just 15 old dromons fitted with Greek fire projectors that set the Viking ships ablaze. The use of Greek fire against the Viking fleet created one of the most spectacular naval battles in medieval history. The secret weapon of the Byzantine navy, Greek fire, was an incendiary compound that burned even on water, creating flames that could not be extinguished by conventional means. When the Byzantine fire ships attacked the wooden Viking longships, the results were catastrophic for the Norse forces. Chroniclers describe Viking warriors jumping into the sea rather than face the flames, only to drown in their heavy armor, while others died screaming as their ships became floating funeral pyres. The psychological impact of Greek fire was as devastating as its physical effects, breaking Viking morale and causing a general retreat that turned victory into complete disaster. The final major Viking assault on Constantinople occurred in 1043, representing the last attempt by Rus forces to capture the Byzantine capital through direct military action. This attack was smaller than its predecessors, but demonstrated the continuing Viking fascination with Constantinople as the ultimate prize for any medieval warrior seeking glory and wealth. But Viking Islamic conflicts were not limited to these spectacular sieges and raids. Throughout the 9th and 10th centuries, Viking warriors served as mercenaries in the armies of various Islamic states, while Muslim forces employed Viking tactics and even Viking warriors in their own military operations. The relationship between Vikings and Islamic powers was complex and multifaceted, involving not just warfare but also trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange that shaped both civilizations in profound ways. Vikings traded European slaves captured in Viking raids in Eastern Europe to destinations in the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East via the Caspian Sea, creating economic relationships that existed alongside military conflicts. Viking warriors who survived battles with Islamic forces often returned to Scandinavia with new weapons, tactics, and ideas that influenced the development of Norse military culture. Similarly, Islamic military commanders who fought against Vikings incorporated Norse tactical innovations into their own armies, creating hybrid forms of warfare that drew on both traditions. The impact of Viking Islamic conflicts extended far beyond the immediate military results to include profound changes in naval technology, fortification design, and military organization across both civilizations. The need to defend against Viking raids forced Islamic states to develop new forms of coastal defense and naval warfare, while Vikings had to adapt their tactics to deal with the sophisticated military systems they encountered in Islamic territories. Perhaps most significantly, the conflicts between Vikings and Islamic powers demonstrated the global nature of medieval warfare and the interconnectedness of military developments across vast geographical distances. Tactics developed in Viking raids on Irish monasteries were tested against Islamic fortifications in Spain, while weapons and strategies used in Islamic campaigns against Byzantine territories were adapted for use against Viking invasions. The cultural impact of these conflicts was equally profound, with both Viking and Islamic chroniclers producing detailed accounts of their encounters that shaped how each civilization understood the other. These written sources provide some of our most vivid descriptions of medieval warfare and offer insights into the tactical innovations and cultural exchanges that occurred during these dramatic confrontations. Understanding the Vikings' craziest battles with the Islamic Empire requires recognizing that these conflicts were not peripheral encounters, but central events in medieval history that influenced the development of military, technology, naval warfare, and international relations across the entire Mediterranean world. When Norse longships met Islamic naval forces, when Viking axes clashed with Damascus steel, the results were battles that changed the course of medieval civilization and created legends that echo through history to this day.